let this black kid into my lecture hall? You, back row, the black one. Get your hands off that desk and get on your feet, now!
Professor Gerald Voss let the verbal assault echo through the room. And then he moved. A sudden, aggressive burst of motion, driving his whole body forward, fiercely thrusting his finger out to invade the kid's space. His towering posture turned into one long threat. Malachi Hayes rose to his feet. 19 years old, silent.
Look! A black face in Graduate School of Theory! How strange! Frankly, son, people like you shouldn't be sitting here!
His voice dropped to something colder, crueler. You are a joke? You don't belong in real physics. 200 seats went dead silent. 200 seats of polished oak, in a hall ruled by a man with more than 20 years of tenure and his name on a building fund. Intouchable. That was the word stitched into the way he carried himself. The way he walked, the way he breathed. Intouchable. Voss slammed a stick of chalk onto the tray, his jaw working with explosive anger, daring the boy to fail an impossible, career-burying problem in front of 40 witnesses.
Solve this problem, or get out of here!
But the arrogant professor had no idea who he was dealing with. This quiet teenager was carrying the blood and the stolen genius of Solomon Hayes, the man Voss personally destroyed 24 years ago. And in exactly 83 seconds, the buried secret was going to detonate and bury Gerald Voss alive. His career, his reputation, his name, the whole kingdom he had built on top of a dead man's work. Before we reveal the jaw-dropping moment, this corrupt titan's entire life completely unraveled. Drop your city in the comments right now. Stay right here. You don't want to miss how a kid from the East Side forces an untouchable fraud to pay for every last one of his crimes. Let's look at what happened next. Let me tell you who Malachi Hayes really was. Malachi was 19, a sophomore at Hargrove University, the youngest student in advanced field theory by 2 full years. Every single day, he took the same chair. Back row, far corner. The seat that faced the exit. The seat where nobody ever looked twice. He never raised his hand. He never volunteered an answer. He never once let anybody in that building see what his mind could actually do. His problem sets came back correct, but flat, unremarkable. A clean B+ average. Nothing brilliant. Nothing dangerous. Nothing that would make a man like Voss take notice. That was on purpose. Every bit of it. See? Malachi learned something early. His grandmother taught it to him before he was old enough to understand he was being taught. Mama Pearl would take his chin in her hand and say it slow. So, it would stick. Don't you ever let them see everything you got? Baby, you save something back. You hold a little in reserve for the day you're going to need it, because being seen had a cost. In his neighborhood, being noticed meant being a target. In his schools, a black boy who shined too bright got watched, got tested, got broken down until he learned to dim himself. So Malachi made himself into a ghost, present, polite, invisible, a nobody in the last row, and it worked. Teachers wrote pleasant, quiet, hard worker on his reports and forgot his face by June. Classmates looked right through him in the hallway. He learned to make himself small enough to disappear, to sit in a room full of people and leave no mark on a single one of them. It was lonely in a way. He didn't have words for back then, but lonely was survivable. Lonely didn't get you broken. So he wore the invisibility like a coat, year after year. And he told himself it was the smart play. He told himself he was saving it all back for a day that might never even come. But here is what nobody in that building could have guessed. Malachi Hayes had been working through doctoral-level physics since he was 15 years old. No tutor. No prep academy. No expensive summer program. No connections. No mentor with letters after his name. Just him. Cold rooms. Cheaper than cheap coffee. A stack of worn notebooks and a single cassette tape he found in a locked footlocker in his grandmother's basement when he was 13. Those notebooks didn't belong to Malachi. They belonged to his father, a man named Solomon Hayes. A man who died when Malachi was only 6 years old. Malachi barely remembered him. Just fragments. The puzzle of a face he could never quite finish. A warm, heavy hand resting on the back of his neck. The smell of chalk dust baked into a coat. And a deep, steady voice saying words that burned themselves into him and never left. Nothing true ever really disappears. Son. People just bury it. That was it. That was all he had. One sentence. One hand. One ghost. His mother never spoke about Solomon. Whenever Malachi asked, Renee Hayes would go somewhere far away behind her eyes, and her voice would draw tight like a wire, and she would change the subject so smoothly, you'd think you imagined the question. Eventually, Malachi just stopped asking. Mama Pearl wasn't any better. She'd only shake her head and say, Your daddy was a good man. The world was not good back. And that was the end of it. For 13 years. That was the whole story. His father was good. The world was cruel. The end. And then he found the footlocker, down in the basement. Behind the water heater, under a quilt that smelled like a different decade. A steel trunk with a busted lock. Inside, page after page after page of equations. Proofs, field diagrams, theories Malachi couldn't begin to read, and margin notes, hundreds of them, in handwriting that made the hair stand up on his arms. Because it looked so much like his own, Malachi didn't understand it then. But he was looking straight into his father's mind. His father's dreams, his father's unfinished work, and the tape, a single cassette. No label. Just a number written in pencil. 47. When he finally found something old enough to play it, he heard a voice he barely remembered, talking himself through a problem out loud. Soft and patient. As if he were teaching a child who hadn't been born yet. Malachi played that tape so many times the ribbon went thin. Understand what that meant. A 13-year-old boy. Alone, in a freezing basement, pressing play on a voice that had been dead for 7 years, and letting a ghost teach him. He'd sit on an overturned milk crate with a notebook open on his knees and rewind the same 30 seconds 40 times, chasing one idea until it finally cracked open in his head. He didn't have a teacher to ask. He didn't have one single person on this earth who could tell him what a symbol on those pages meant. He had a dead man's voice and his own stubborn refusal to quit. And night after night, year after year, that turned out to be enough. There were nights he wanted to throw the whole thing across the room. Nights. The math felt like a wall, with no door in it. And the voice on the tape stopped sounding like a teacher and started sounding like a man laughing at him from somewhere he could never reach. But every time he got close to walking away, he heard that one line again. Nothing true ever really disappears. So, people just bury it. And something in him refused to let his father stay buried. It took him years to crack the code. He'd come home from school, leave his own homework in his bag, and study his father's work instead, teaching himself, symbol by symbol, idea by idea, By 15, he wasn't just reading what Solomon had written. He was continuing it. By 17, he was solving problems that would have stopped most graduate students cold. By 19, he was, quietly and invisibly, one of the most gifted minds at Hargrove University, and not one living soul knew it. Not his professors. Not his classmates. Not even his mother. He kept the gift hidden. Protected. Saved back. Just like Mama Pearl taught him. For the day he'd need it. He had no idea that day was coming. He had no idea a 24-year-old secret was about to detonate in a lecture hall. He had no idea that his dead father's past was sitting at the front of that room, holding a piece of chalk, waiting for him. Now let me tell you about the man at the front of that room. Professor Gerald Voss. The man who thought the word untouchable was carved into his bones. Voss was 58, tenured for more than 2 decades, published in journals that most physicists only ever read, never wrote for. He ran his lecture hall the way a king runs, a small, cruel country. And he was the king, the law, and the weather all at once. Students had a name for his course. They called it the graveyard, the place where good GPAs went to die, where ambition got buried in an unmarked grave, where bright young people came to learn their proper place and leave quietly. Voss liked it that way. He fed on the fear. He warmed his hands at it. He had a phrase he loved. Maintaining the bar. He said it at every faculty meeting, every department review, every time a colleague got nervous about his methods. I'm just maintaining the bar, weeding out the ones who were never going to make it anyway. He never once explained what kind of student he meant by that. He didn't have to. Everyone in that department knew exactly what he meant. And most of them looked at their shoes. 3 formal complaints of racial bias in 5 years. 3 black students who said Voss singled them out, humiliated them in front of the room, and drove them out of the program. All 3 complaints dismissed. Insufficient évidence. Because Gerald Voss had friends in the administration, the kind of friends who made problems vanish before they hit a desk. But Gerald Voss had a secret of his own. One he'd been hiding for 24 years. And it was about to walk right through his door and sit down in the back row. Every few years, a student slipped through his filters. Someone who didn't match the picture in his head of what brilliance was supposed to look like. The wrong skin. The wrong accent. The wrong zip code stitched into the way they carried themselves. And every single time, Voss found a way to put them back in their place. A question in front of the whole hall, designed to expose and shame. A problem chosen to humiliate. A grade engineered to push them toward the exit door without quite leaving fingerprints. It always worked. For 20 years, it always worked. The student would start to doubt themselves. Then they'd drop, transfer, disappear. And Voss would smile, his thin smile, and tell himself the bar had been maintained. The kingdom protected. He had no idea Malachi Hayes was different. No idea that this quiet kid from the east side of Detroit was carrying something Voss couldn't have imagined in 100 years. A gift. Handed down from a man Voss had personally destroyed 24 years ago. A man named Solomon Hayes, Malachi's father. October 9th, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Lecture Hall, 2:15. Advanced Field Theory. Malachi walked in, like he walked in every day. Backpack on one shoulder. Eyes down. A ghost. He took his usual chair. Back row. Far corner. The one that faced the door. 40 other students filled the hall. Mostly juniors and seniors. Mostly white. Mostly from families who could write a check for Hargrove's $56,000 a year without flinching. Malachi was the exception in every direction. Scholarship kid. Work study. Overnight shifts unloading freight at a terminal off the interstate to cover what financial aid wouldn't touch. He didn't complain about any of it. He showed up. He did the work. He stayed invisible. Professor Voss was already at the front when Malachi sat down, chalk in hand. And there was something wrong with the air in that room. A charge. A pressure. Good afternoon. Voss's voice had an edge on it you could shave with. Today we're going to have a little fun. A few students traded looks. Fun. In Voss's hall. Usually meant somebody was about to bleed. He smiled. The kind of smile that makes the animal part of your brain tell you to run. I have a challenge problem. Something special. Something I've been keeping in a drawer for years. He turned to the board and dragged a long horizontal line across it. Anyone who solves this earns automatic extra credit, enough to lock in an A for the semester. No matter what else you do for the rest of the term, whispers moved through the hall, like wind through grass. An automatic A in the graveyard. That had never happened. Not once. Not ever. But the whispers died. There's a catch. If you try, and you fail, and you will fail, you drop one full-letter grade. Effective immediately. No appeal. No second attempt. Silence. Nobody breathed. Nobody volunteered. Voss's eyes moved down the rows. Slow. Hunting. Face to face. Until they stopped, where he had always meant for them to stop. The back row. The far corner. The black one. And that's when it happened. That's when he drove his body forward and thrust his finger into the boy's space and demanded to know who let this black kid into his lecture hall. That's when he ordered Malachi to his feet, called him a brochure photo and a charity committee fraud, told him in front of 200 people that he was a joke who didn't belong in real physics. That's when he slammed the chalk down and dared him to fail. Then he wrote out the Kessler Problem in long, sweeping lines of chalk. The Kessler Problem. A question about the stability of a particular field configuration that had stood unsolved for 40 years. The kind of thing whispered about at conferences. The kind of thing that had a name because so many careers had broken against it. Voss finished writing, set the chalk in the tray, dusted his hands, and stepped to the side so the whole hall could watch the boy fail. Whenever you're ready, son, take all the time you need. We've got all afternoon to watch you not belong. Malachi looked at the board for a long moment. And in that moment, somewhere underneath the fear, he heard the tape. He heard his father's voice, soft and patient, talking a problem out loud to a child who hadn't been born yet. Nothing true ever really disappears. Son, his hand had stopped shaking before he even knew he'd decided to move. He stood. He walked down the long aisle. 40 pairs of eyes followed him. He picked up the chalk Voss had set down. And he looked at the problem the way you look at a face you've known your whole life. And he began to write. The room changed. Voss's smirk held for the first 10 seconds. The way a smile holds in a photograph after the smiling has stopped. Malachi wasn't fumbling. He wasn't stalling. He was carving, line after line, clean and unhesitating. An argument unfolding like something that had always existed and was only now being uncovered. He took a turn nobody in that room had seen before. A sideways move. Elegant and strange. A method that wasn't in any textbook because it had never been published under the right man's name. 83 seconds. He set the chalk down. He stepped back, and the solution stood there on the board in his careful, unhurried hand. Complete. Correct. And beautiful. A 40-year wall, knocked flat in the time it takes to tie a pair of shoes. Voss stared at the board, and the blood drained out of his face one shade at a time. That's... His voice cracked clean down the middle. That's not possible. That's not. You couldn't have. It's correct. Sir. Malachi's voice was level. You can check every line. One student started to clap. Then a second. Then the row behind. Then more. Stop. Voss threw up a hand. All of you. Stop. The applause died. But it was too late. The damage was already done. Witnessed. Burned into 40 memories. Impossible to take back. A 19-year-old black sophomore from the east side had just walked to the front of the graveyard and solved. In 83 seconds. A problem a tenured professor had spent his entire life hiding behind was spoon on him. Face gone from white to red. Hands shaking at his sides. The explosive anger from the start of class curdling into something that looked a great deal like fear. Where did you learn that method? He demanded. That approach is in no text I have ever seen. My father taught me. Your father. And something flickered behind Voss's eyes. Something that didn't belong on the face of a man in control. Who is your father? His name was Solomon Hayes. He died when I was 6. For 1 second. Just one. The mask shattered. Fear. Recognition. Something that looked an awful lot like panic. And then it was gone. Slammed shut. Replaced with ice. Class dismissed. Everyone. Out. Now. Students grabbed their bags and stampeded for the doors. Electric. Already typing. Malachi didn't move. Mr. Hayes. Voss's voice was barely under control. You will be hearing from me. The story spread across that campus, like a grass fire in August. By dinner, half the school was telling it. And it grew with every mouth it passed through. Did you hear some sophomore walked up and solved Voss's impossible problem? Under 2 minutes, made the old man lose his whole mind. A black kid from Detroit who hadn't said one word all semester. And then, boom. Students who had never taken a physics class in their lives were arguing about it in the dining hall. Malachi Hayes. The quiet one from the back row. The kid who made Gerald Voss look like a fraud in front of 40 people. Malachi wanted no part of it. He went home to his apartment. Locked the door. Pulled the blinds. And tried to disappear back into the walls, the way he always could. It didn't work. His phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Messages from classmates who'd never said hello. Follow requests from strangers. He ignored every one of them. What he couldn't ignore was the feeling sitting low in his gut. Cold and certain. Something was wrong. The way Voss had looked at him when he said his father's name. That was not surprise. Surprise doesn't make a grown man's face come apart like that. That was recognition. That was fear. And fear like that doesn't come from nowhere. 2 days later, Malachi found out exactly where it came from. The email arrived at 4:12 in the afternoon. The subject line, academic integrity. Formal inquiry. Immediate meeting required. Malachi read it 3 times. Each time the words landed harder. Academic integrity. That meant cheating. That meant expulsion. That meant everything. The scholarship. The nights at the freight terminal. The years bent over his father's notebooks. Gone. He walked into Voss's office at 4 o'clock sharp. The door clicked shut behind him like the lid of something. Voss sat behind his desk. Calm now. Fully in command. A stack of papers squared off in front of him, with a kind of theatrical neatness. Sit down. Mr. Hayes. Malachi sat. The chair was low and hard. On purpose. Probably, let me be direct with you. Voss's voice was smooth as a closing door. Your performance 2 days ago raised serious concerns. Concerns. Your solution was too clean, too fast, too sophisticated for someone of your background. There it was again. Your background. And heat climbed Malachi's chest like a struck match. But he kept his face as still as stone. Let me put it plainly. No sophomore on Earth solves the Kessler problem in 83 seconds. Not without help. Not without having seen it somewhere before. Not without cheating. I didn't cheat. Then explain it. Voss spread his hands like a generous man. Explain to me how a 19-year-old from the east side of Detroit, working night shifts on a loading dock, scraping by on aid, sits down and dispatches a problem that has defeated professional physicists for 40 years. Malachi kept his voice steady, though everything inside him was a clenched fist. I told you in your hall. My father taught me. Ah. Yes. Your father. The dead physicist. Voss's lip curled. How convenient. A witness who can never be cross-examined. It's the truth. Here's what I think the truth is. Mr. Hayes. He drew a single sheet from his stack. I think you found that solution somewhere. In an old paper. In some forgotten corner of the internet. You memorized it. You waited for your moment. And you performed it like a magic trick in front of my class. He slid the paper across the desk. This is a formal academic integrity complaint. I'm filing it with the dean's office today. Malachi looked down at it. His own name at the top. Words scattered through it like broken glass. Fraude. Misconduct. Misrepresentation. You have 2 weeks to prove you didn't cheat. Voss smiled. And it was the coldest thing in the room. And let's both be honest. So? You can't. When you fail, and you will fail, you'll be expelled. Permanently. Your transcript flagged for the rest of your life. Your future. He let the word hang there and rot. Well, I'd hold on to that loading dock job. If I were you, it may turn out to be the best you ever get. Malachi's hands closed slowly in his lap. But when he spoke, his voice didn't move. I learned that method from my father's notebooks. He was a physicist. He worked on this exact problem. Something flickered again behind Voss's eyes. Just for a beat? Your father's notebooks. Yes. And what did you say his name was? Solomon. Solomon Hayes. The flicker became a crack. The mask slipped. Half an inch. No more. I've never heard of him. Too fast. Too loud. Too defensive for a man who'd never heard of anybody. He studied physics. He was brilliant. Everyone said. I said I've never heard of him. Voss was on his feet. This meeting is over. You'll receive formal notice of your hearing within 48 hours. He crossed to the door and opened it. And let me give you some free advice. Withdraw now. Save yourself the public spectacle. Because that is exactly what's coming for you. Mr. Hayes, I guarantee it. Malachi stood. His legs felt strange under him. But he held the man's eyes. I didn't cheat. And I'm not withdrawing. Then you're a fool. Just like. Voss stopped himself. Not quite fast enough. Just like who? Get out of my office. Malachi left. But all the way down that long hallway, one thing rang in his skull and would not stop. Just like who Gerald Voss knew something about his father, about the past, about something he had spent 24 years burying, and he was terrified of it crawling back into the light. That night, Malachi made a phone call that pulled the whole thing open. Ma, I need to ask you something. About Dad. Silence. Long. Heavy. Why are you bringing this up now? Malachi, because a professor at Hargrove is trying to expel me. He's accusing me of cheating. And when I said Dad's name, Malachi paused. Ma. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. More silence. And then a sound Malachi hadn't heard in years. His mother, crying. What's the professor's name? It wasn't a question. Voss. Gerald Voss. A sharp breath. A sound she tried to swallow and couldn't. Ma. What is it? What happened? Come home this weekend. Her voice was shaking now. There are things I should have told you a long, long time ago. About your father. About that man. What things? Not over the phone. Please. Come home. The line went dead. Malachi sat in the middle of his apartment floor, surrounded by his father's notebooks, the handwriting he'd memorized, the equations he'd lived inside for 6 years. He pulled the oldest one into his lap and opened to the first page. Faded pencil at the top corner. Hargrove University. Fall 2000. His father had studied here. At this school, in this department, 24 years ago. He turned the pages. Faster now. Hunting for, he didn't know what. Near the back, a page had been torn out clean. Only the ragged edge remained. And a few words that had bled through from the missing sheet. One of them was legible. Voss. Whatever had happened between those two men. It had destroyed his father's life. And now, it was reaching across 24 years to destroy his. Malachi drove home that weekend. 4 hours of highway. Wipers fighting a gray rain the whole way. The city of his childhood rising slow and familiar out of the wet. His mother was waiting at the kitchen table with a cardboard box in front of her. The box he had never once been allowed to open. I kept this hidden. Renee Hayes' voice was barely above a breath. I told myself if you never knew, you'd be safe. Safe from what? Ma. She opened it. Inside. Letters. Documents. Photographs gone soft at the corners. And a young man with Malachi's eyes. Malachi's jaw. Malachi's exact, slow smile. A face he had spent 13 years trying and failing to remember. Malachi picked up the photograph with both hands. Careful. Like it might come apart. He had spent 13 years trying to build his father's face out of fragments. A hunt. A voice. The smell of chalk dust. And here it was. Whole. Looking back at him, they could have been the same person. The same brow. The same set to the mouth right before a smile broke loose. For a long moment, he couldn't speak. He just sat there at his mother's kitchen table, holding the only complete picture of his father he had ever seen. And he understood, finally and all at once, why she had kept this box locked away all those years. It wasn't only dangerous, it was unbearable. Every photo in it was a wound that had never gotten the chance to close. Your father was a graduate student at Hargrove. 24 years ago. Her hands wouldn't stay still. He was the most brilliant mind in his program. His professors used to say he'd change the whole field. That people would be reading his name in 100 years. What happened to him? His advisor happened. She drew out a letter. Yellowed. Dated to the spring of his father's last year. Dear Mr. Hayes, following the committee's investigation into allegations of academic misconduct, your enrollment at Hargrove University is hereby terminated. Effective immediately. Malachi's eyes went to the signature at the bottom of the page. Gerald Voss. Department chair. His blood turned to cold water. Voss was Dad's advisor. More than that, His mother wiped her face with the heel of her hand. Your father developed something. A breakthrough. A solution to a problem that had stood for 40 years. She looked at him. And she already knew. The same problem you solved in that man's classroom. Malachi, the Kessler Problem. He was going to publish it. Make his name. Change everything for us. For you, before you were even a thought. Her voice broke down the middle. And was stole it. He took your father's work, published it under his own name. The next year, built his entire career on it. The tenure, the awards, the building with the donors' names, all of it standing on top of what he took from a 21-year-old kid. She pressed her lips together until they went white. And when your father tried to fight back, when he tried to prove the work was his, Voss accused him of plagiarism, of stealing his own work. The university believed the tenured white professor over the young black graduate student. There was no real investigation, no fair hearing. There was just destruction. She slid out another sheet. A formal complaint in his father's own hand, dated to that final winter. Insufficient évidence. They said. He was expelled 2 weeks later, blacklisted. No other program would touch him after Voss got done with his name. Malachi felt the room tilt slowly around him. But there was one more thing he had to ask. One more. And he already knew it was going to take a piece of him to hear it. Ma, how did Dad die? She couldn't look at him. Please, I need to know. You were 6 years old. Her voice cracked apart. He tried to move on. He really did. He got a job that was beneath him and never said a word about it. He married me. He had you. And for a few years, you were the only thing in the world that could make him laugh. She finally raised her eyes, and they were full. But the injustice ate at him, living every day, knowing his life's work was carrying another man's name, knowing the whole world thought he was the thief. She stopped. She tried to make herself finish the sentence. And she couldn't. She didn't have to. Malachi understood. And something inside his chest went cold and to flee. Very still. His father had not simply died. He had been killed. Slowly. Deliberately. A piece at a time. Over years. By a man who stole his work. Poisoned his name. And then went home and slept just fine every single night for 24 years. And that man was still out there. Still teaching. Still powerful. Still standing at the front of full lecture halls. Still hunting the kid in the back row who didn't fit the picture in his head. Still doing it. To this very day. And now he had come for Solomon Hayes' son. I'm not going to let him win again. Ma, Malachi, please, just transfer. Walk away. Don't let that man do to you what he did to your father. Malachi shook his head slowly. Dad walked away. He gave it up. And it killed him. He stood up from the table. I'm going to finish what he started. And I'm going to make Gerald Voss answer for every single life he buried. The next 2 weeks were the worst of Malachi's life. He filed his appeal. The university told him the burden was on him, that he would need to produce new evidence. Evidence that Gerald Voss had spent 24 years burying in archive boxes and dead men's silence. The Integrity Office handed him 14 days, 2 weeks to prove he wasn't a cheat, 2 weeks to dig up a crime older than he was. It was never going to be enough. They built it that way on purpose. The whispers started before he even got back to campus. That's the kid who cheated in Voss's class. Heard he lifted the solution off some old forum. Typical affirmative action fraud. They always get caught eventually. Students who'd never said a word to him suddenly had hard opinions about his character. His study group stopped answering the thread. His lab partner put in a request for a transfer. Professors who used to nod at him in the hallway now looked straight through him like he was a pane of glass. Even the freight terminal turned on him. His shift supervisor handed him extra hours with a knowing little smirk. Figured you'd have more time on your hands soon. Heard you got yourself some trouble up at the school. Malachi didn't ask how he'd heard. Bad news travels fast, especially when a powerful man is the one carrying it from door to door. It's a particular kind of cruelty, being turned into a story before you ever get the chance to tell your own. People who didn't know his last name 3 weeks ago suddenly knew exactly what kind of person he was. They'd decided. The quiet kid who cheated. The charity case who got greedy. And the worst part wasn't the strangers. It was watching people who used to be kind to him recalculate it all in real time, deciding the safe move was to back away slow. A nod that used to come easy now came with a flinch. A seat next to him in the library that used to fill up now stayed empty. He started taking the long way everywhere just to dodge the looks. He ate alone, standing up, in the corner of a stairwell where nobody went. He turned his phone face down so he wouldn't have to watch it light up with strangers who'd already convicted him. 24 years ago, they had done this exact thing to his father. Made him radioactive. Made the whole world cross the street to avoid him. And now Malachi was learning. Cell by cell. Day by day. Exactly what that had felt like. He stopped going to class. What was the point? Every lecture felt like a courtroom. Every professor felt like a witness for the other side. He spent his nights alone, surrounded by his father's notebooks, hunting through them for something, anything, that could save him. The notebooks that had taught him everything. The notebooks that, in a way no one else could understand, had raised him. The notebooks that not one person in any position of power believed were even real. How do you prove a dead man's work is authentic? How do you fight a system that was designed to protect the people standing at the top of it? Malachi didn't know. And every day, the hearing got closer. Then came the letter that nearly finished him. Dear Mr. Hayes, your appeal hearing has been scheduled for the Friday following Thanksgiving. At 9 o'clock in the morning, the Friday after Thanksgiving, the deadest day on the academic calendar. Please note this date falls during the holiday recess. Faculty advocates and student representatives may have limited availability during this period. Malachi read it 5 times. And each time the real message underneath got clearer. They had scheduled his hearing for a day when the campus was a ghost town, when there'd be no witnesses in the building, when nobody would be around to watch what they did to him. This wasn't a hearing. This was an execution with paperwork. He tried to fight even that. He called everyone he could think of. The Integrity Office, closed for the holiday. The Student Advocacy Center, voicemail, legal aid. We'll return your call after the break. The Dean's Office. The schedule is non-negotiable. Given the serious nature of the allegations, every door closed, every road blocked, every handhold greased. Malachi sat in his apartment with the walls leaning in on him. His father's notebooks spread around him on the floor like a field of small gray headstones. And for the first time, he understood his father completely. He understood why a man could lay his work down and stop fighting. He understood why Solomon Hayes had decided the system wasn't broken at all, that it was working exactly as designed, built to protect the men like Voss, built to bury the men like his father. And the boys like him? Maybe Ma was right. He said to the empty room. Maybe I should just walk away. And that's when he found the envelope At the very bottom of his father's box, underneath the letters and the photographs and the official lies, sealed and gone soft and yellow with age. 3 words on the front in handwriting Malachi knew better than his own. To Malachi. When he's old enough, his hands were shaking so hard, it took him 3 tries to open it. So, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry I couldn't be stronger than they were. They took almost everything from me. My work. My name. My future. In the end, they took my will to fight. And that was the only thing I ever owned that was truly mine to lose. The words swam. He wiped his eyes and kept reading. But there are 2 things they could never get their hands on. One of them is you, and the other is what's in your blood. You have the gift. Son, I saw it when you were still in your mother's arms. The way your eyes tracked patterns across the ceiling. The way you reached for my notebooks before you could even crawl. One day you are going to be better than I ever dreamed of being. I know it the way I know my own name. And when they come for you, because they will come for you, the same way they came for me. Don't you dare make my mistake. Don't disappear. Don't go quiet. Don't hand them the satisfaction of your silence. And then the words that hit him like a fist in the chest. Fight. Even when it hurts. Even when you're standing there completely alone. Even when the whole world has already made up its mind that you can't win. You fight anyway. Because laying it down is not peace. So, it only looks like peace. It's just another kind of dying. So you stay on your feet. You stay loud. You make them prove every lie out loud. In the light. Where people can see. Promise me that. Dad. Malachi held that letter against his chest in the dark, and he understood. His father had known. Before Malachi was even born. He had known this day was coming. And across 24 years, he had reached out and told his son exactly what to do. So Malachi did not sleep that night. Instead, he worked. He laid every notebook out in order. He dated each page. He cross-referenced every equation, every diagram, every method against Voss's published papers, line by line, until the sun came up gray in the window, and the pattern was undeniable. Solomon Hayes's work, dated the fall before Gerald Voss's celebrated publication, the year after, the same configuration, the same method, the same impossible solution, in the same unmistakable sideways style. The dates proved everything. His father came first. Voss was the thief, plain as daylight. But Malachi knew the evidence alone would never be enough. Not against a tenured professor armored in 24 years of institutional protection. Not in a building designed to bury people who looked like him. He needed someone on the inside. Someone with credentials Voss couldn't burn. Someone with a name they couldn't make disappear. He opened his laptop and pulled up the Hargrove faculty directory and started reading. Looking for one ally in a building full of glass. One name stopped him cold. Dr. Adrian Wells. Associate Professor of Theoretical Physics. Ph.D. MIT. One of only 3 black faculty members at Hargrove. The only one in the entire physics department. He'd heard things about her. That she didn't play the politics. That she didn't protect the old guard. That she had a reputation for picking up the fights that everyone else was too comfortable to touch. Malachi looked at the clock. 5:47 in the morning. Too early to call. Not too early to write. Dr. Wells. My name is Malachi Hayes. You don't know me, but I need your help. Professor Voss is trying to have me expelled for cheating, but I have evidence that he's been hiding something for 24 years. Something about my father. His name was Solomon Hayes. Please. You're the last door I have left. He hit send. Then he waited. Minutes became hours. Hours became something that felt like forever. Dr. Adrian Wells was 48 years old. Anmit doctorate. Published in the kind of journals most physicists only ever cite. She had survived 20 years in academia, the only way a black woman in that world ever survives it. By being twice as good and 3 times as careful. She knew which fights to pick. She knew when to speak and when to swallow it down. For 24 years, she had swallowed down Solomon Hayes. Not anymore. Her office was small. Books crammed too deep on every shelf. Degrees on the wall in plain black frames. And on the corner of her desk, a single photograph. A cluster of young graduate students squinting into the sun, arms around each other. The whole future still ahead of them. Close the door, she said. Sit down. Malachi sat. Tell me everything. From the beginning. Don't you leave anything out? He talked for 30 minutes. The problem on the board. The humiliation. The accusation. The notebooks. The cassette tape. The letter from 24 years ago. The page torn out with a single word bleeding through. Everything. Dr. Wells listened without once interrupting, her face giving away nothing. When he finally ran out of words, she was quiet for a long time. Then she reached out and turned the photograph on her desk to face him. You see that young man, second from the left. Malachi looked. A black man. Maybe 21. With a brilliant, wide-open smile and eyes full of a future that hadn't happened yet. That's your father, Solomon Hayes. We were in the same doctoral cohort. The fall of 2000, Malachi's heart stopped in his chest. You knew him. I knew him well. He was the most gifted physicist I have ever stood in a room with. Before or since. We all knew he was going to rewrite the field. Her voice dropped low and went hard. And then Voss destroyed him. You saw it. You were there? I saw all of it. She rose and crossed to her window, her back to him. Your father built something extraordinary. A solution to a problem that had broken better men for 40 years. It was going to be his masterpiece. His name? Made permanent. The Kessler Problem. The one Voss made me solve. The very same. She turned around. Voss was his advisor. He had access to everything Solomon was developing. He knew exactly what was in those pages. And he took it, published it as his own. The following year, off of that one theft, he got the tenure, the prizes, the reputation, the money, everything. Her jaw tightened. And when your father tried to fight back, when he tried to prove the work was his, Voss accused him of plagiarizing it. His own work, and this institution chose to believe the tenured white professor over the young black student. No investigation worth the name. No fair hearing. Just a quiet, clean ruin. A heat was building behind Malachi's ribs. You were standing right there. You could have said something. I know. Her voice cracked clean in half. I was 22 years old. A black woman trying to survive in a department that barely admitted I existed. Speaking up meant losing everything I'd bled for. I told myself it wasn't my fight. I told myself maybe Solomon had done something wrong. That maybe I didn't know the whole story. She met his eyes and held them. I've carried that lie for 24 years. I wake up with it. I go to sleep with it. Every single time Voss passes me in that hallway and nods like we're colleagues. I remember exactly what I didn't do. Then why help me now? Because I'm done being a coward. Dr. Wells sat back down across from him. And because you have something your father never had. What? Proof they can't wave away. She pulled a folder from her bottom drawer. After your email, I went digging. University archives. Old department records. Things Voss assumed he'd buried so deep, nobody would ever turn the soil again. She opened it and spread the pages across the desk between them. This is a research proposal your father submitted to this department in the October of his final year. It lays out the exact method Voss published the following year. Word for word. In places, Malachi stared. His father's name, his father's work, dated, stamped, official, and a full year ahead of Voss. And this? She slid out another document. This is a formal complaint your father filed that winter, alleging in plain language that his advisor, Professor Voss, stole his research and claimed the credit. Malachi read it. His father's words, his father's pain, pressed flat onto a page and kept in a box for 24 years. It was dismissed. Wells said quietly, Insuffisante évidence. Your father was expelled 14 days later, so he's done this before, Malachi said slowly, and gotten away clean for 24 years. But here's the thing. She leaned forward. Your father's notebooks? If we can prove they're authentic, that they're not some elaborate forgery cooked up to save your skin, then Voss's entire defense falls in on itself. Because his whole case against you rests on one claim, that nobody from your background could possibly do this work. We make him eat that claim. How do we prove the notebooks are real? We don't. She almost smiled. We get someone else to prove it. Someone whose credentials are so far beyond reproach that this university would not dare argue with them. She picked up her phone. My doctoral advisor, Dr. Nathaniel Stone, MIT, Emeritus, Nobel laureate in physics, the most respected man in the discipline. Period. If Stone says your ability is the real thing, there is not a soul in that hearing room who can say otherwise. Will he help? I honestly don't know. He's 71. Semi-retired. He doesn't take meetings anymore. She started to dial. But for something like this, for the chance to right a wrong that should never have stood, he just might make an exception. The phone rang once, twice. A voice answered. Malachi couldn't hear the words. Only Dr. Wells's half of it. Nathaniel. It's Adrian. Yes. I know it's been too long. A pause. I need a favor. A big one. Academic fraud. 24 years old. And the man it was done to. His son just walked into my office. Another pause. Yes. I'm certain. The name is Hayes. Solomon Hayes's boy. Silence on the other end of the line. A long one. And then Dr. Wells closed her eyes and let out a breath. Thank you. Nathaniel. I'll send you everything tonight. She hung up. Dr. Stone is assembling a panel. 3 physicists. An independent evaluation of your ability on neutral ground. With no Hargrove administrators in the room and no Voss. She looked at him. You have 48 hours to prepare. Malachi felt something he hadn't felt in 2 weeks. Hope. Thin and dangerous. What's the catch? One of the panelists. Her expression darkened. Dr. Raymond Tate. Princeton. A brilliant theorist. And he was a doctoral student here at Hargrove in 2000. Malachi's blood went cold. He knew my father. Almost certainly. They overlapped. She held his gaze. Which means he is either a witness to what happened, or he's one of the men who watched it happen and chose silence. Like the rest of us did. And Malachi. I don't know which one he is. I genuinely don't. Malachi stood. 48 hours, 3 physicists, 1 chance. If you pass their evaluation, Wells said, the plagiarism charge loses its only leg to stand on. If you fail, she didn't finish it. She didn't need to. He knew exactly what was waiting on the other side of failure. The Wednesday before Thanksgiving, 9 o'clock in the morning, a glass-walled conference room on the top floor of a building downtown. Neutral ground. No deans. No Voss. Just 3 physicists. And Malachi. Alone on one side of a long table, Dr. Nathaniel Stone, 71. Mit. Emeritus. Nobel laureate. White hair. Eyes like a hawk that had stopped being impressed by anything decades ago. And a presence that made everyone else in the room feel about 3 sizes smaller. Dr. Margaret Chen, 55. Stanford. An experimentalist famous for her brutal honesty and her absolute zero tolerance for an excuse. And Dr. Raymond Tate, 62. Princeton. A theorist. And, as Malachi now knew, a Hargrove man from the year his father was destroyed. Tate's face gave away nothing at all. Friend or enemy? Malachi couldn't read it. Dr. Stone spoke first. Mr. Hayes, you understand the purpose of this evaluation? Yes. Sir, we're here to determine whether your ability is genuine, whether you solved that problem through skill or through fraud. Stone's voice was cold and clinical, as a steel table. We have no stake in the outcome. We are not here to rescue you. And we are not here to condemn you. We are here for one thing only. The truth. Malachi nodded. Good. Then let's begin. The first problem landed in front of him. A stability analysis in nonlinear dynamics. Graduate level. The kind of problem that draws a hard line between students and scholars. Malachi picked up his pencil. For 1 second his hand trembled. The full weight of everything pressing down on it at once. His father's legacy. His own future. 24 years of buried truth. And then, under all of it, he heard the tape again. The soft, patient voice. Nothing true ever really disappears. So, people just bury it. His hand went still. He began to write. The first problem took him 43 minutes. The expected time was 90. Dr. Chen's eyebrow lifted half an inch. And she made a note. He wasn't rushing. That was the thing none of them expected. He moved through it the way his father moved through the problems on the tape. Unhurried. Almost gentle. Like he was having a conversation with the math instead of fighting it. Every line led cleanly into the next. No dead ends. No scratched-out false starts. Just a mind that had spent 6 years learning to think in a language most people in that room had needed a lifetime and a fortune to learn. Across the table, 3 of the most decorated physicists alive sat and watched a kid from the East Side make the impossible look like an ordinary Tuesday. The second problem was nastier. A field theory derivation with the kind of structure that buries people. But halfway in, Malachi found a turn. An elegant shortcut. A method that wasn't in any text because it had never been published under his father's name. 1 hour and 8 minutes. Dr. Stone leaned forward in his chair, watching now with real attention. The third problem had no clean answer. An open-ended theoretical construction. No right solution to memorize. Just a demonstration of how a mind actually moves through unknown territory. This was where raw talent either showed itself or didn't. This was where most people drowned. Malachi closed his eyes. He thought of his father's whole approach to the universe. Sideways. Unexpected. Beautiful. He opened his eyes and he wrote, 3 hours and 22 minutes after he'd picked up the pencil. Malachi set it down. Done. The panel gathered his pages and bent their heads together, conferring in low voices. Malachi sat without moving, his entire life in 3 other people's hands. Dr. Tate studied the pages longest of all, and his expression wasn't suspicion. It was something else, something that looked an awful lot like grief. Finally, Dr. Stone looked up. We'll need 30 minutes to review. Wait outside. Malachi walked out into the hallway. Dr. Wells was there, on her feet before the door closed. How did it go? I don't know. His voice came out hollow. I did everything I had. That's all anybody can do. They waited. 30 minutes became 45. 45 became an hour. Every second landed like a verdict. Then the door opened, and Dr. Raymond Tate stood there, alone, with something heavy sitting on his face. Mr. Hayes, may I speak with you? Privately. Dr. Wells went rigid. Whatever you have to say to him. Please? Tate's voice came apart at the edges. This is personal. Malachi followed him to the far end of the hall, away from the door, away from any ears. Tate couldn't meet his eyes. I knew your father. Malachi's heart stopped. We were in the same program. The fall of 2000. He was. Tate swallowed. He was the best of us. The most brilliant mind I have ever known. And I've spent 40 years in rooms full of brilliant minds. We all knew Solomon was going to do something that mattered. Something they'd name things after. What happened? Voss happened. Tate's hands were shaking. Your father developed a solution. Revolutionary work. And Voss took it, stamped his own name on it, and called it his. You knew. We all knew. Tate finally raised his head, and his eyes were wet. When Voss turned around and accused your father of plagiarism, every one of us in that program knew it was a lie. We knew it the way you know the sun came up. But Voss had the power, the tenure, the friends in the dean's office, and we were young, and we were scared, and we told ourselves it was none of our business. He pressed the back of his hand to his mouth. I've carried that for 24 years. I told myself your father must have done something to deserve it. I knew better. I always knew better. A cold fury was rising in Malachi. You let him destroy my father? Yes. Tate's voice broke wide open, and I have hated myself for it every day since. He reached into his jacket and drew out a folded envelope. This is my written statement. Everything I witnessed in that program. Everything I should have stood up and said 24 years ago and didn't. Malachi took it. His hands were trembling now, too. Why now? Because I watched you solve those problems in that room. Tate wiped his face, unashamed of it now. And I realized you're not just fighting for yourself. You're fighting for him. For a man who deserved so much more than he got. A man every one of us failed. He drew himself up straight. And for the first time, he looked Malachi dead in the eye. I am not going to fail him a second time. I'm changing my assessment. And I am going to testify against Gerald Voss. Malachi stood there holding the envelope. A confession, 24 years in the making. But would it be enough? The door opened again. Dr. Stone stepped out. Mr. Hayes, we're ready for you. Malachi walked back in. Dr. Wells at his shoulder. Tate moving to take his seat with the others. Dr. Stone held Malachi's pages in his hand. Mr. Hayes, in more than 40 years of physics, I have evaluated thousands of students. From MIT, from Princeton, from Cambridge, from the finest institutions this world has built. He paused. Your work this morning is exceptional. The first problem, solved in under half the time we allotted. The second, you used a method I have only ever seen in advanced research. and you used it cleanly. The third, your construction shows original thinking at a fully professional level. Malachi held his breath. It is my professional opinion that you are not a fraud. You are a genuine and rare talent. Dr. Chen nodded once. Sharp. Agreed. The accusations against you are baseless. Full stop. Dr. Tate rose to his feet. And I am prepared to provide sworn testimony regarding events I personally witnessed in 2000. Events that explain precisely how Professor Voss came to possess the work he has called his own for 24 years. Malachi let out a breath. The first real, full breath he'd taken in 2 weeks. Dr. Stone looked directly at him. And for just a moment, the hawk's eyes softened. Mr. Hayes, your father would be proud of you today. The Friday after Thanksgiving, 9 o'clock in the morning. The University Administration Building. The hearing room was cold and formal, built to make a person feel small. On one side of the long table, Malachi, Dr. Wells, and a stack of evidence 24 years in the assembling. On the other side, Professor Gerald Voss, confident, relaxed, smiling the smile of a man who had scheduled this fight for the emptiest day of the year and could already taste the win. He had no idea what was about to walk into that room. This is a simple matter. Voss's voice was smooth, practiced, the voice of a man who had won 100 rooms like this one. Mr. Hayes submitted a solution no undergraduate could possibly have derived on his own. He refuses to explain how he obtained it. The only rational conclusion is academic dishonesty. He spread his hands. The picture of reluctant duty. I take no pleasure in this. But Hargrove has a bar, and the bar must be maintained. Dean Robert Ashby turned to the other side of the table. Mr. Hayes, your response. Malachi stood. His voice was steady. I didn't cheat. I couldn't have. Because the method I used came from my father's notebooks. Notebooks dated a full year before Professor Voss published the very same solution under his own name. Voss's smile flickered. Objection. Those so-called notebooks could have been fabricated last week. Then explain this. Dr. Wells stood and laid a document on the table. This is a research proposal submitted by Solomon Hayes to the Hargrove Physics Department in the October of his final year. It describes, in detail, the exact method Professor Voss published the following year. She set a second page beside the first, and this is a formal complaint filed by Solomon Hayes that same winter, alleging that his advisor, Professor Voss, stole his work and took the credit for it. Voss's face went the color of old paper. Those documents are irrelevant. Solomon Hayes was a proven plagiarist who... Solomon Hayes was my father. Malachi's voice cut clean across the room and stopped Voss dead. And he didn't plagiarize anyone. He was the one who got robbed. Dr. Wells kept going, relentless and calm. We also have independent verification of Mr. Hayes's ability. 3 physicists. Dr. Nathaniel Stone of MIT, Dr. Margaret Chen of Stanford, and Dr. Raymond Tate of Princeton evaluated him 2 days ago on neutral ground. She produced their written assessments and laid them out in a row. All 3 concluded that Malachi Hayes is a genuine and exceptional talent. All 3 stated, in writing, that the accusation against him is baseless. Voss was sweating now. Those evaluations prove nothing about where he first learned. There's more. Dr. Wells's voice dropped and hardened. Dr. Tate has provided a sworn statement. She slid it across the polished table. Dr. Tate was a graduate student here. In 2000, he witnessed Professor Voss take credit for Solomon Hayes's work. He witnessed the false accusation that followed. And he witnessed the cover-up that buried it. Voss shot to his feet. This is hearsay. Tate is lying. He was never. Sit down. Professor Voss. Dean Ashby's voice was a sheet of ice. You will have your chance to respond. Voss sat. His hands were shaking on the table. Malachi stepped forward. My father was 21 years old when Professor Voss destroyed his life. Malachi's voice was low, and it carried into every corner of that silent room. He was accused of stealing his own work. Expelled. Blacklisted. Erased. He never recovered from it. His voice cracked, and he let it crack. And he kept going anyway. He didn't survive what this man did to him. He was gone by the time I was 6 years old. I have one sentence of him left in my memory. And the weight of one hand on the back of my neck, that is what Gerald Voss took from me. That is what he took from a little boy who never did a thing to anybody. He pointed across the table. And now, 24 years later, this same man tried to do the exact same thing to me. Because I walked into his lecture hall, because I solved a problem on his board in 83 seconds, because he could not stand the sight of a black kid from the east side of Detroit knowing something he was certain a kid like me could never know. Malachi's hand did not waver, and his eyes did not leave Voss's face. He didn't accuse me because I cheated. He accused me because I was proof. Living, breathing proof. Sitting in the back row of his own classroom, that the thing he built his entire life on was never his to begin with. Then Dr. Stone's recorded testimony played on the screen at the front of the room. The Nobel laureate's face filled the wall. I have reviewed Malachi Hayes's work in detail. His abilities are extraordinary, and his methods align precisely with the research documented in his father's notebooks. Research that predates Professor Voss's published work by more than a year. Stone looked straight into the camera. It is my professional opinion that Professor Gerald Voss has built his entire career upon stolen work, and that his accusation against this young man is not merely false, it is the continuation of a fraud that began 24 years ago. The video ended. The room was so quiet you could hear the projector fan. Dean Ashby turned to Voss. Professor Voss, do you have anything to say? Voss opened his mouth. He closed it. For the first time in 24 years, the man had nothing, and everyone in that cold, formal room watched it happen. The smoothness was gone. The certainty was gone. The man who had ruled a kingdom on the strength of never once being questioned sat there with his mouth working and no words coming out. Because for the first time in his life, the lie would not hold. There was no friend in the dean's office who could make this one vanish. No empty holiday calendar to bury it behind. No frightened young people who would look at their shoes and say nothing. Just the truth, finally spoken out loud. In the light, where people could see it. Exactly the way Solomon Hayes had begged the world to let it be spoken. 24 years before. And in that moment, Voss looked like what he had always been underneath the tenure and the awards and the building with his name on it. A small man, holding something that was never his. The dean nodded slowly. The charge of academic dishonesty against Malachi Hayes is dismissed, effective immediately. A pause. And this office will open a formal investigation into Professor Gerald Voss concerning allegations of research misconduct, en fraudulte accusation, and abuse of academic authority. Malachi let out a long breath. 24 years. Finally, daylight, before the hearing adjourned. He stood up one last time. I didn't come here for revenge. He looked at Voss, the man who had killed his father slowly, the man who had tried to do the same to him. I came here for my father's name. His voice was steady now. Certain, Solomon Hayes was a brilliant physicist. He was 21 years old when his life was stolen out from under him. His work was taken, his reputation was poisoned, his name was erased. Malachi held up his father's notebook, the cover worn soft by his own hands and his father's before him. He deserved to be remembered, not as a fraud, not as a cautionary tale somebody whispers at a conference, but as exactly what he was, a genius who moved the field forward. Even if the whole world gave the credit to the wrong man. He set the notebook down on the table. That changes today. The investigation took 3 months. 4 cases of research misconduct. Confirmed. 3 former students came forward with their own stories. Stories they'd buried out of the same fear that had silenced everyone else. 2 decades of stolen and appropriated work, dragged out into the light, one box at a time. Gerald Voss's tenure was not accepted in resignation. It was stripped. His publications were flagged. His awards were rescinded. His name was scraped off the scholarship he'd founded with money that traced back to a dead man's theft. He wasn't simply fired. What happened to him was worse. He was erased. From the journals, from the conferences, from the department he had ruled like a small, cruel kingdom for more than 20 years. The last anyone heard. Gerald Voss was teaching remedial algebra at a 2-year college 3 states away, making $41,000 a year. Living in a single rented room, he had spent his whole life trying to make other people invisible. Now he was the one nobody wanted to see. Hargrove University formally credited Solomon Hayes as the original author of the work Voss had published under his own name. The American Physical Society issued a public correction to the record. 24 years of lies. Undone in a single official statement. A fellowship was established in his name, the Solomon Hayes Memorial Fellowship in Physics, funding first-generation students, kids from the East Side, kids from Section 8, kids who unload freight at night to pay for a future nobody handed them. Kids like Malachi. That spring, Malachi published his first paper. He titled it The Kessler Problem, a Solution, and the man who found it first. The dedication read, "For my father, Solomon Hayes, who solved this first, who taught me that nothing true ever really disappears, and who deserved so much more than this world ever gave him." But here's the part that matters most. Because the story doesn't stop at one man's downfall. Dr. Adrienne Wells was promoted to chair of the department 2 years later. The first black woman ever to hold the position at Hargrove. Dr. Raymond Tate donated his entire personal savings to the Solomon Hayes Fellowship. He called it penance. Penance for 24 years of silence. Hargrove created an independent review board for every academic integrity case. From then on, no more closed-door hearings. No more scheduling a student's reckoning for the deadest day of the year so nobody would be around to watch. No more tenured professors sitting in judgment of their own victims. Mandatory bias training for every member of the faculty. An anonymous reporting system for students who were too afraid to put their name on a complaint, and 3 other universities adopted the same reforms. Citing the Hayes case by name, 1 student, 1 problem on a chalkboard, 1 family's buried truth, and a system that would never again get to work quite the same way it always had. Malachi's mother framed the newspaper article and hung it in the living room. Local student exposes decades of academic fraud. Father's legacy restored. Below it, she placed a photograph, the one from the box, Solomon Hayes at 21, smiling, full of a future that had finally, somehow, arrived, finally seen. A year later, Malachi stood at the front of a lecture hall, not as a student this time, as a teaching assistant, the same hall where Voss had tried to humiliate him, the same board where he had written out 83 seconds of his father's mind in front of 40 witnesses. Different air in the room now. Lighter. Cleaner. In the back row, a black sophomore sat alone. Quiet. Eyes down. Invisible. Exactly the way Malachi used to make himself. After class, Malachi walked up the aisle to him. "You're good at this. I've seen your problem sets." The student looked up. Startled. "You noticed." Somebody always notices. Malachi smiled. "Sometimes they notice you so they can tear you down. But sometimes they're standing right there to lift you up. The hard part is, you can't always tell which is which until it's already happening. So you keep going anyway." He held out a notebook. A copy of his father's work. "This is what raised me. Maybe it'll help you too. Here's what this story is really about. It was never about physics. It's about power. Who has it? Who doesn't? And what happens in this country when a person with power takes one look at you and decides, before you've said a single word, that you don't belong." Gerald Voss looked at Malachi Hayes and saw a target, a black kid from the east side. Somebody to mock. Somebody to make an example of. Somebody to break in front of a room so the rest of them would remember their place. He didn't see a prodigy. He didn't see a legacy. He didn't see a son carrying his dead father's unfinished dream up to the front of the room. He had no idea who he was dealing with. And that, right there, is the thing about underestimating people. Eventually, they prove you wrong. Voss learned it the hard way. 24 years of lies. 24 years of stolen brilliance with another man's name stamped on it. All of it beginning to come undone in 83 seconds. By a student he was certain didn't belong in the room. Now let me talk to you for a second. Maybe somebody looked at you once and decided you didn't fit. Maybe they made you feel invisible. Maybe they told you, out loud, or in 100 quieter ways, that you weren't good enough because of your skin, your background, your accent, the neighborhood you came up in. Maybe you're still standing there right now, holding everything you can do in reserve, waiting for your 83 seconds. Here's what I need you to hear. It's coming. The people who underestimate you, they don't know what you're carrying. They don't know what you've already survived. They don't know what's in your blood. They see your surface, and they think that's the whole story. They have no idea how deep you actually run. So keep going. Keep building. Hold a little something back if you have to. The way Mama Pearl taught it. And when your moment finally comes, make them learn the hard way. So let me ask you, and I want you to really answer this in the comments. Have you ever been underestimated because of how you looked or where you came from? What happened? Did you get your moment? Or are you still waiting on it? Have you ever had a Voss in your life? Somebody with power who tried to make you small? And is there a Solomon Hayes in your story, somebody whose truth still deserves to be told? A name that somebody erased that you'd give anything to restore? Drop it below. Tell me your story. The best ones become future episodes on this channel. And if this one moved you, if it made you angry, or it gave you hope, or it reminded you of your own fight, share it. Send it to somebody who's been counted out, somebody who's still fighting to be seen, somebody who needs to know that the truth has a way of climbing back into the light, even if it takes 24 years to do it. Subscribe to The Long Reckoning, because the truth doesn't expire. It just waits. And remember this. A professor didn't know the black student in the back of his hall was finishing his dead father's life's work. He wrote a problem no one had solved in 40 years to mock him, to humiliate him, to prove that kids like him don't belong in that room. 83 seconds later, he found out exactly who he was dealing with. This has been The Long Reckoning. Stay unbowed. because a story like this one should never have been the exception. It should be the last time it ever happens. Here, we take a single moment of injustice and we turn it into a call for something better, something fairer, something that finally holds. Subscribe and help us make that call louder and longer and a whole lot harder